We're back with another episode of the Crypto Mavericks podcast. And I'll tell you what, we have a great guest here today because Joe and I both have a personal interest in staking Solana. So we have Hadley Stern. He's the Chief Commercial Officer of Marinade, one of the premier Solana staking platforms out there. Just really excited to dive deep and talk all about the platform. Hadley, thanks for jumping on today.
Thank you for having me. Great to be here and looking forward to talking all things Solana and staking.
Yeah, we like staking. We like to earn our fair share of money. We also love Solana on this podcast. That's why it's just a really perfect fit having you on. But before we dive into Marinade, we'd love to know a little bit about your background. I know we were talking before the show and it was really interesting, so we'd love to share with the audience.
Yeah, sure. So based in Boston, been in crypto 10 plus years. Started my crypto journey as part of the very, very early team at Fidelity Investments, which is continued to be one of the leaders in the institutional space for crypto. And I was helped build up some of their very early product, was the initial president of Fidelity Digital Asset Services, then left to join the startup world because wanted to really get into DeFi. And I worked at a company called Block, BLOQ, which is Jeff Garzik and Matt Rozak's blockchain infrastructure shop. And then got recruited back to TradFi at Bank of New York Mellon, where I built their digital asset custody business. And now back on the DeFi side and very, very deep in Solana for about a year as Chief Commercial Officer at Marinade. So, when I started my career, there was only Bitcoin. Then ETH came along. And so it was part of that journey. And now we have Solana and a ton of other chains. And it's a very exciting and dynamic space to be in.
Yeah, that's why Joe and I are in it as well. We caught the bug, the crypto bug, and everything that's the innovation, everything that's being built out there. Every day we wake up, there's absolutely something new in this space, and it keeps us on our toes. And that's what I love about it. What attracted you to? You said 2012, right? Is that when you got into
2014? Honestly, I'll use a corporate term here. I was voluntold to get into crypto. So I was doing some other things at Fidelity, and I was part of a team called Fidelity Labs, and I was managing all their product management, design, development teams. And at the end of 2013, I just said to my boss, who was the head of labs, look, if anything strategic comes along that's a single topic, throw my name in the hat. And the next thing I know was you're going to lead the Bitcoin incubator. So I wish I could say it was some sort of intellectual breakthrough that I was reading the Satoshi white paper with a glass of scotch, but it was a lot less sexy than that. But it was a very happy to be, coerced into it. And then within a few months, I was all in.
I love that. I love that. Everyone has their own kind of origin story of how they got into crypto, who suggested Bitcoin to them for the first time, and it's always a lot of fun. All right, let's jump in and talk a little bit about Marinade here. Can you give us an overview of what Marinade is, what you're building right now, and how it's really positioned in the Solana ecosystem?
Yeah, so Marinade has been around for 3+ years. It's actually really the OG staking provider on Solana. It was started out of a Solana hackathon, and the team had this idea to solve two problems at the same time, or two challenges. One was how to offer end stakers the highest yield they can get while also supporting decentralization of the Solana network. So if we go back 3+ years in the history of Solana, at that time, there was a lot of concern around the number of validators that were in the ecosystem or the lack of number, and this concern around centralization. And if you run a validator on Solana, it's funny, when I first joined Marinade, I've run Bitcoin miners, I've run ETH miners. I was like out of my basement. I've got the voltage to do it. I was like, oh, I'll run a Solana validator, right? Because I love to learn. And Solana validators are not easy things to run. They're basically kind of impossible to run out of your house. Yes, you can get the PC that's powered, has a right amount of speed and RAM and solid state drives, but you need a gigabit connection that is never interrupted. We were just talking about kids. You got a kid watching Netflix, suddenly your validator's dead. So running a validator on Solana is really a professional endeavor. And one of the things that you need as a validator economically is you need Solana to stake. And Marinade helped solve that. So that was really the early creation of Marinade with a liquid staking token, mSOL, which was, I believe, the first LST on Solana. And now, if we fast forward to about 18 months ago, Marinade's got about 1.5 billion total value locked up, and the institutions are starting to come to Solana, and they're reaching out to the Marinade team and saying, how does it work for institutions? What if we want to use Marinade for an ETP or an ETF? What if we have a family office? And at that point, our CEO, Michael Repentny, made the strategic decision to build up this institutional pivot. And I joined as an advisor and eventually full-time as I fell in love with the product and the team. And what does that mean, institutional? That means some kind of unsexy things like a SOC 2. That means tooling the product. So we're integrated now with Zodiac, Copper, and BitGo, and we're working on others. And we're powering Bitwise's ETP in Europe. And last week, we announced the filing with Canary of the Canary Marinade Solana staked ETF in the US. So that's kind of where we started and where we are now. What has not changed is we don't run any validators ourselves, which sometimes catches people off guard. We are this efficient marketplace connecting people who want to stake, receive the highest yield while supporting decentralization with the validators in the ecosystem who can do that.
Wow, interesting. That's there's a lot of competitors out there out in the space, and you guys always offer the most because is it aggregated through all the validators out there, and how does that work?
Sure. So the basic way it works is we run a stake auction marketplace, which sounds exactly what it sounds, very descriptive. So a Solana epoch is 48 hours, and every 48 hours, validators who want to receive stake from Marinade bid with some economic pieces that aren't typically available to end stakers, MEV fees, etc. And there's a stake auction marketplace, and the validators that give the highest bids win the stake, and we pass that down to the end staker. So basically what we've done is we've unlocked a marketplace to allow for the efficient value of transfer from some economic components that validators can't transfer economically down to end stakers. So that stake auction marketplace works. And then the yield that you see as the end staker is the result of that, which is why we're able to beat even zero fee validators.
Hadley, what's recap this for me? The benefits to liquid staking versus traditional staking, and how that will impact institutions as well. Just kind of, if you could help me understand.
Yeah, perfect question, and it's part of our move to serve institutions. We launched native staking. So, LSTs are wonderful. There's a place for them. But when you look at an institution's requirements for staking, there's a couple of challenges with liquid staking tokens. One is that you have additional smart contract risk. Even though mSOL's been running for 3+ years, there's just a greater attack vector or, what could go wrong vector when you have an LST, just by the very nature if you have a smart contract. The second piece that is specific to Solana that's very advantageous for Solana native staking is that when you stake natively in Solana with Marinade, what happens is, say Joe decides to stake 1,000 SOL with Marinade native, and he does it from his BitGo account. When he does that, and when Joe hits stake in BitGo, what he's doing is he's giving Marinade delegation authority to delegate that 1,000 SOL to whichever validators are highly performing. But Joe retains withdrawal authority, which means in the disaster scenario where something happens with Marinade, we got a business, we get hacked, I don't know, whatever, Joe still has access to unlock to get that SOL back from the validators. And this is really important for individuals, but it's really important for institutions as well. And it's something that's only available for with native staking.
Can you explain why the yields are different between the two?
Yes, they run different auction marketplaces. So because you can kind of consider them two different pools. kind of aggravates us to no end because it causes customer confusion. But it's just the way we haven't figured out a way to do it differently. They're just different pools that just have different economic results. And sometimes they're pretty far away. Sometimes they're much closer, but they are just kind of different pools is the way I'd look at it.
With the native staking, you also get mSOL with that?
You do not. No mSOL. So what happens is the staking rewards are paid out every epoch into your Solana wallet. So there's no liquid staking or mSOL involved in native staking.
I found myself seesawing between the two throughout the years and not trying to understand, but I'm your average user that went to the highest APY. And I thought, I'm going to do something with mSOL. Haven't done anything. It's sat in my wallet for like a year or two now. So that's kind of the level of staking that I'm at. I'm sure there's more advanced users. What's been like the most interesting one, I would say, for mSOL that you've seen, or the most adoption or pool that's been, surprised you or maybe not?
Yeah, typically people who stake with mSOL, there's kind of the stake it and forget it cohort. And what we like to say to people is if you believe in Solana enough to buy it, you should just buy mSOL. Don't buy Solana because with mSOL, you get the Solana price action along with staking. It's like a no-brainer. And then the more advanced users like mSOL because they like to do things in DeFi with it. So for example, a user may take mSOL and take it to Camino, which is a DeFi platform on Solana, and they may multiply it, which means that basically Camino automates the ability to take mSOL 75% collateral, take that collateral, borrow in USDC, buy more mSOL, and basically loop it. So that's where, mSOL, a liquid staking token, shines versus native, because you can't do that in native.
Wow, I did not know you could do the looping with mSOL. That's the first time I'm hearing that. That's really interesting. And a lot of times that equates to like negative yields on the lend side or borrow side. How does that break? How does that wheel break? Because a lot of companies or DeFis have really tried to launch that strategy to attract liquidity.
Yeah, you can go to Camino and check it out, mSOL there, but it breaks if there's a liquidity issues in the underlying, just like in any DeFi, there's an LTV ratio, and if that breaks, then you could get liquidated. So I'm not saying it's obviously not investment advice and buyer beware. It's like anything in DeFi. I'm just reflecting what a lot of our users do, which is, you can take that mSOL, and some people do it self-service via Camino. What we're seeing some institutions do, family offices that are very sophisticated, they'll do that kind of DeFi lending and leveraging themselves natively within DeFi.
You've had some pretty big news here you mentioned it earlier about Marinade's the first staking provider to be named in a US Solana ETF filing. So really, really great stuff there. It's a proposed ETF from Canary Funds. That's big news. I'm curious, how do you see the upcoming Solana ETFs impacting just the overall crypto market and Marinade with being named in that filing?
Yeah, so the ETF market is going to be very interesting to see how it evolves. If you look at Bitcoin as an example, about 6% of Bitcoin is now locked up. Well, I don't know if locked up is the right word, is in ETF vehicles, which is kind of amazing. It's like if you look at the top 10 wallets on Bitcoin, Satoshi, of course, is number one, but I believe there's 3 in there now that are ETFs, BlackRock, Fidelity, and one other. And I think we'll expect to see something similar once the Solana ETFs are approved. There's a couple of big pieces to get over, and one of the organizations we're very involved with is the Proof of Stake Alliance, which is a trade association group for staking, and was down in DC about 6 weeks ago doing a variety of activity with Senate, House members, and also the SEC. And the first hump to get over that the SEC needs to rule on is Solana a security or not? And that will pertain to the ETF. And the second is, if you remember, the original Ethereum ETF applications had staking included, but under the previous administration, they were told to take out staking in order to be approved. So the other piece that has to be figured out by the regulators is, what about staking? We're pretty confident that's going to happen by the end of the year, if not sooner. And so then it is an interesting question around what is that market going to look like? What we've seen in the ETF space with Bitcoin and ETH is that, Bitcoin just it's like the granddaddy. It has the most mind share, and ETH is kind of lagging second quite significantly. But the question is that because of ETH going through its own issues right now? Is there's questions around its viability, or is it just market education? So I think we'll have to see.
I have a question as a general consumer comes and takes a look at Marinade. You worked with Fidelity, you worked with BNY, and there's risk on TradFi and with Web3. What are some of the kind of the red flags you would say? You could kind of see that with the TradFi world, but in the Web3, people, I mean, it's definitely transparent. Well, but how do you assess risk for an average consumer coming in? Like, hey, Marinade looks great, but if I want to deploy, like you said, family office type of money, I'm sure they're going to do more due diligence. But someone that wants to put 6 figures worth of SOL in here, I would say that would be an average person that can come in and do that. What are some risks? You mentioned smart contract. What else is there?
I think, and this is something we're working a lot with the regulators on, and this is where it'd be great to have some standardization, is the first thing is that staking is not a financial product per se like lending. Staking is a protocol activity. But then it's like, how do you judge that? How do you know that in its purest form? Right now, we don't really have a standard way to do it, except that you can look on chain, which is, again, requires some amount of technical acuity or understanding. So I think that's something we have to do better as an industry. But when a big holder is looking at us, they're typically looking at, they may want diligence into how the system works. We've just recently gone through SOC 2. And SOC 2 is kind of an institutional industry standard that we're doing basic things like, we're storing backup wallets in the correct location. We do business with only known entities. We do background checks on employees. These are things that are like not necessarily DeFi, but are demanded by more sophisticated investors. And SOC 2 involves a third-party audit. So it's not a matter of just saying you're doing something. You have a way to actually prove it. And that becomes the higher you go up the stack of TradFi or high net worth individuals, the higher those requirements become, and they're just have to be presented in the way you do business. Now that should help also the end everyday user, of which I'm one, feel more comfortable. As long as they understand what's behind all those things.
Like, what's one of the most common misconceptions you get when you're talking with traditional finance people and you're explaining staking? And the reason I bring that up is I actually had this happen to me over the weekend with a friend of mine who's in traditional finance, and I'm explaining staking to him, and I was like lost. I'm just curious what the feedback is on your end.
There's a lot of misconceptions and education points, which makes the job sometimes challenging, sometimes fun. I always like to describe Marinade as kind of like a Russian doll, and we're the tiny doll at the end of Solana staking. But then there's Solana, proof of stake, blockchain, crypto. You have to go through all these different areas. I think that the primary one is, for better or worse, people have sort of wrapped their head around Bitcoin mining. But it's then going through and explaining what proof of stake is versus proof of work. That's a big one. Another big one is, where does the APY come from? Like, wow, that's quite a lot of yield. What are you making it from? And explaining, the inflation dynamics of the protocol and that it's built in, and the difference between Solana and Ethereum. That's a big one. And then a lot of questions around security, which I kind of alluded to. What is the security model? What happens to my Solana when I stake it? Where does it go? What do I have control over? And look, we don't make it as easy as an industry because, we add the liquid staking token piece, which is another wrinkle. So I don't envy someone new to this space trying to understand. But the big story I'd say for staking for TradFi is it's not a financial product first. It's a protocol activity which you can happen to earn some rewards from.
This is probably a bad comparison, but I'm thinking of bonds when you're saying this. Like the U.S. can always issue new bonds, and
Yeah.
then will there come a day where the U.S. is like, "Hey, if you stake your bond and you don't sell it for like 20 years, we're going to give you some more rewards." What I'm saying is a lot of stuff is coming on chain, and are there different products that you're going to evolve into, or is it just going to be sell staking for a while?
Yeah, for Marinade, we pride ourselves, and we're a Solana only team, only focused on staking. So one question that comes up quite a bit is what about taking the stake auction marketplace and this model and doing it for other chains? And the quick answer is no, because there's a competitive advantage to us being focused only on Solana. And I'll give an example of that. One of the products we have in alpha right now is called Instant Unstake. So I mentioned that 48-hour epoch. If you're running an ETF and you have end of day redemptions daily, one of the challenges is that you've got to wait 48 hours to receive your Solana. Well, we've developed and are launching Instant Unstake, where there'll be a marketplace, there'll be a lending marketplace to put out a bid that will be institutional grade to be able to get your Solana more quickly. Those are things that can only be built when you're just dedicated to staking and on-chain only. And that's just proven to be an advantage for us in the marketplace because we know the space so well.
I'm loving the crew neck that you have on here. And
thank you.
We were talking. I actually called out before the show as well. I was like, I don't know. There's something about the little chef hat logo and the name Marinade that just speaks to me for some reason. Maybe it's because I love food. But tell me a little bit about the origin of the name. Who came up with Marinade? Curious about that.
Yeah, it definitely predated me, and I think it came out of the hackathon. There was this idea of they were cooking up something new. And so I think that's part of it. And then part of the idea, like when you think about making a marinade, you're taking off different ingredients from different places and bringing them together to build something better. And that's the idea of this multi-validator. People love the name. One of the things I really like about working for it, I get to go to different conferences and present, and almost everyone is like, "Oh, Marinade, yeah, that was my first experience staking with Solana." And people have a very affectionate view of the brand, and it's playful. I think it's nice. It seems to be translating to the institutional market, and everyone has weird names these days. So, and we play off it in our branding as well, and the way we talk to each other. So yeah, it's definitely fun. Another piece of swag we have is great oven mitts that are really nice. And also a chef's hat, which I could have worn on the podcast, but I decided not to.
We'll do that for podcast number 2 in a couple of months.
Exactly.
Nice. Yeah. Hate to put you through the ringer here, but tell us a little bit about the Marinade token. I see that's a reward token, governance token, also kind of like Jupe.
Yeah. So Marinade has a token, MNDE. I'm not sure on the current pricing, but it's probably about 100 million in the treasury. Another unique thing about Marinade is the company actually never did a raise, either token or equity. So it's one of the more decentralized projects because of that. We use the token for governance and voting. We have a DAO, and we also use it to fund some of our operations. But the company for the past couple of years has been positive from an ARR standpoint. So we're revenue positive and have a healthy treasury and governance community as well, which is great.
We're big fans of Marinade. This is one of the few times that I think Joe and I have a podcast guest on. We interview multiple times people a week, and I feel like Joe and I both have experience with the platform and staking SOL on your platform. So we love what you're building in the space. I'm gonna kind of give you just a broad question here, just about the overall crypto market. Things are heating up, it feels like right now. Every day we're getting a new headline. I think I saw Bitcoin, whenever we're releasing this, at like $110,000 earlier this morning. What's your view for this? Are we in a bull run? What's your view just personally where we're going in this entire crypto space over the next couple of years?
Yeah, personally, Bitcoin's such a funny thing because I feel like some days I wake up and I can I can intellectually justify $10,000 Bitcoin and $1 million Bitcoin in the same breath. I do. It does feel very much like we're ready for the next real significant bull run for Bitcoin, and that there's so many elements coming together, especially with the ETF standpoint and the amount of demand for it, and the appearance that it is continuing to merge as an uncorrelated asset, which I think is what people hope for Bitcoin. So I'm still very bullish there. I think on the altcoin side of things, I'm obviously very bullish on Solana. I think Bitcoin is the digital store of gold, a digital store of value. Even though the Satoshi white paper was really about it being a replacement for currency, I don't really see that happening, and I just see Solana being the chain where all the other blockchain use cases are going to be built. When I joined Marinade, one of the pieces of due diligence I did was on Solana, right? If I'm going to join Marinade, I better feel good not only about Marinade, but also Solana. And I've been involved quite a bit with the Solana Foundation, the team there. And I remember I went to Stake Point last year in Singapore, and I was just blown away by the professionalism of the Solana companies. And I think the foundation has weaved this nice sort of compromise between being hands-on, but also hands-off. Like you've got to let you've got to let the companies actually build, but you've got to know what to give enough to have that happen. So, even though the foundation does a lot of big things, they're very lean. And so and it's also a very practical chain. It's like a chain of builders. So I think outside of Bitcoin, obviously, bullish on Solana. And then there are some other projects that, may be related to storage that may come along and actually see fruition, like Filecoin and SIA, et cetera. But from my personal standpoint, it's kind of Bitcoin plus Solana is my worldview right now, probably because it's mostly what I'm involved with.
Same here. I think me and Brian's portfolio is probably just around that 60-40 Bitcoin Solana, as most of my friends are, which is funny because we were all Ethereum maxis in the past, myself and Brian. We can't bring on a Solana native product and not ask about meme coins. Because, with the conversation we're having, you would think we're talking about the Ethereum network, we're just like protocols and products. But, I think memes have been net positive overall for the space. What's your favorite? Do you have one? Just thoughts overall on memes.
Yeah, my view of meme coins, like people get really hung up on it and view it as a negative proof point for Solana. My immediate question is, why did it happen on Solana? Well, it happened on Solana because the network is cheap and fast. That's why. So forget about what the topic of meme coins are, but I almost view the meme coin phenomenon as like an MVP for institution, NASDAQ on chain. So if you look at Trump coin, whatever we want to say about Trump coin, I was not at the dinner. Trump coin did that day that it happened, did about 10% of NASDAQ volume. And Solana didn't hiccup. There were some DEXs that had a couple of issues, but not related to the chain. So when I look at meme coins, I say, why did they happen here and what does it mean? It's almost like a foreshadowing of the future. Meme coins themselves, do they have meaning? I don't know. I'm not a sociologist. I mean, there's plenty of things. I mean, you could argue, what's a sports card? Like, what's a baseball card? I mean, yes, it's a player behind it, but as human beings, we've been involved in many absurd activities, of which meme coins is, just one example. Will they morph into brand things or NFT things? I don't really know. In terms of my personal involvement, not very involved. I have a couple for shits and giggles, like, who's not going to buy pudgy penguins? I mean, they're cute, right? But have I been very involved in it? No. I think the intersection of the meme coin phenomenon with AI and agents, that's all going to come together. So yeah, I agree. I think it's a net positive. It proves the viability of the chain, proves that it's operational, has some of these emerging use cases. That's typically where innovation happens in technology and industry. I go back to like Napster. Napster was this weird, not legal thing that someone built up that allowed you to trade music, and now we have Spotify and Apple Music. So these are just things that are planting the seeds for really interesting innovations to come.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. We've had some people on the podcast mention that as well. Really, Solana was battle tested. The network was battle tested when that Trump coin hysteria happened. I know I was in on it hard, and everybody that I knew in crypto was on the Solana network, and we were not having many hiccups. We were getting trades through, and things were happening for sure. So there's an interesting way to look at it. Of course, I personally, not financial advice for anybody in our audience, I do dabble in meme coins, but by my own personal philosophy is that's just because I'm in the space so often. There's some higher gains to be made, but the cornerstone of my portfolio is not anywhere close to what I do with meme coins. It's just, having some fun, owning some coins, and it's an interesting dynamic. The meme coin world. I hated them years ago. Like when Dogecoin first came out, or not first came out, like was catching 2016, 2017-ish. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. This is going to zero. And I talked a lot of crap on meme coins for a lot of time, documented, but I got one over.
Yeah. And it'd be interesting to see how the space evolves. We'll see. As you're seeing brands and people and have their own meme coins. Do you guys have a meme for the podcast? What's going on?
No, we haven't really dabbled with that too much, because then it gets sticky, whenever you're like trying to educate people and then doing like a coin or something connected to your brand. We kind of stayed out of that completely, but I guess never say never. Who knows?
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you jumping on the podcast today. I think Marinade's a fabulous platform. Again, not financial advice for anybody out there, but you should definitely check it out. If you're a Solana maxi, you're interested in staking, this was a wonderful interview, very educational. I would love for you to give an opportunity for anybody to learn more about you and Marinade.
Yeah, thank you. The short story is if you believe in Solana, you should be staking it. And if you're staking it, you should be staking it at Marinade to get your highest APY. So, anyone can go to marinade.finance and do them themselves through the DApp. And in terms of me, you can follow Marinade on Twitter. I post quite a bit and write on LinkedIn as well, at Hadley Stern on LinkedIn. So you can follow me there. And also on Twitter, but, building that up as well. But mostly, if people have questions about staking, please feel free to ask the Marinade account. We're here to help. We're the experts in it when it comes to Solana, and have been running, the longest at it, and are very passionate about it. So thank you for having me on and the opportunity to talk even more about Solana staking, that little Russian doll at the end of the crypto Russian dollosphere.
We appreciate you. Thank you.